Well, that's okay.
All right.
We gotta do what we gotta do. Yep.
Hi, everybody. We're at the hub here. This is Philip. We got John with me.
Aloha.
And we got Dane over here too. And we are missing Ikaika, who is working on his boat motor today.
We miss him.
Yeah, we do. Yeah, but we know you guys have been waiting, so we're gonna do our part of the update as much as we can. We've been just recently talking about it. Ikaika mentioned last night about the new rules, and we haven't got any more information on that. We just know that we're still looking into it.
Yep.
So when the man is back, we'll have him give you guys an update directly on what's going on with that.
We'll also be doing a full update on it probably tomorrow as soon as more information comes available and we have something more solid to go off of.
All right, so the part that we can update, we will do an update now. John, you want to start?
Sure.
You want to do it?
Yeah, well, I can talk about it. And then Philip will probably have some more details of what's happening lately or whatever he's prepared. But I've been trying to kind of crystallize what we know about this eruption so far and speak to some of the questions about what the future might bring and how we react to that. And I guess the way I want to break that down is that we've been watching the fish rate flow, and we're getting very used to the fish rate flow being where it is in the channel. We're planning for public viewing now, and the real concern is it's spreading out near Kapoho, and everyone's afraid of it getting the warm ponds or the remaining houses in Kapoho beach lots. But I want to pull back from that a little bit and think about the bigger picture, is that we still have no indication of the activity here at the summit subsiding or ceasing. And so we can expect that we will have to deal with new lava flows before this eruption is over. And so we know the concerns for anything further uprift could erupt and cover more of Leilani. And we've been repeatedly pointing out there are contingencies where if it flows alongside the fish rate flow, it could be deflected into drainages that would end up taking it by Nanavali and another neighborhood. But beyond that, I wanted to mention it's not just about which way is the beginning of the flow going to go. It's not just about is it going to follow the blue line or veer off in another unexpected direction. We have to anticipate that a new lava flow with the kind of volume we've been seeing can overwhelm whole areas of the landscape. And so if, for example, we had our dreaded scenario where a new fissure becomes active higher up the rift or 8 breaks out of its channel, so if we have the scenario of it breaking out of the channel and pooling here and heading by Nanavali, or a new flow coming from higher up and flowing in that same general direction, because that's something we see as pretty likely, it's not just about what course is it going to take. Is it going to follow along this old Fissure 8 arm, or is it going to get over the rise and follow the next blue line? When it comes out that way, it's not about how much it pools or how tall the front is even. This flow is going to stack up on itself as a big flow until it charges up with enough volume of lava to push the crust further. And you'll see that same process of stalling out, filling up, and then surging really fast and covering the ground. And it's in those stages of the flow that it's the most dangerous, where we can think of the entire length of this big flow that's filling up with lava can break out and come in a new direction. The whole flow is very, very volatile as it moves out. So what I'm getting at is I want to try and get away from people describing it as a flash flood and thinking about where the flow will fit, and understand that the flow is going to be a massive rocky feature, and we need to treat the entire thing as extraordinarily dangerous, as at any moment a flow of that type could find the right landscape where it'll spread out as we saw it before. And that's the thing to react to. So it's not about predicting exactly what course it will take initially. It's that if we have a new flow, everybody on this map needs to understand that they need to react to that and follow every detail. It's not going to flood out all at once. It's going to be that frustrating starting and stopping, but the entire length of the flow has potential to branch out in any direction. And so having that ultimate awareness rather than waiting for details, because none of the details like, oh, it's a foot lower that way than it is to the left, so I think it's going to go that way. Don't bet your lives on those kind of details, because the flow might do unexpected things, and we have so much lava. Never forget that any one of these new flows could also go south towards Kamaili. Anything higher up rifts can affect both south towards Seaview, Kalapana, Kamaili, Opihikau, and north through Leilani, through Nanavali, through Pahoa even if we get breakouts further up rift. And I'm pointing this out to you now because we don't know how much longer this is going to last, but one likelihood is fissures erupting higher up the rift before it finishes. So to get to something Dane was asking about us a little earlier, with this eruption now, with number 8 and number 22 have been active lately. 22 is producing the small lava flow that caused some brush fires over here near PGV. The question is, can we see the eruption move further down the rift? And if it does, will there be earthquakes if it moves down lower? Will there be earthquakes and signs if new fissures are going to erupt? And here's the thing we can be pretty sure about. The way the eruption's going, any of these fissures that we already have can reactivate at any sort of level, from spatter to 200-foot fountain, might happen real quick, and probably not without earthquakes. It's already been sneaking around between these fissures. The intrusion that's feeding all of the fissures has pressure all within it, and whichever becomes the exit, it could activate really quickly without earthquakes to warn us. If we had new fissures rip out open, I mean brand new ones that we don't have yet, south of fissure 17, any more fracturing is probably going to involve earthquake swarms out down the rift if it went down that way, because as far as we know, the intrusion did not break the rock further down the rift. The magma intrusion of lava underground that caused the cracks only got to a certain point somewhere in here-ish, and if it goes further, we'll see earthquakes. However, if it backs up the rift this direction, we might get new cracks and new eruptions without much earthquakes, because we know the initial intrusion already fractured that ground, yeah? And so cracking out the surface might be pretty minor. The major cracking already happened from April 30th to the 3rd while it was working its down. So even if the fissures aren't open on the surface, it could open up there without a lot of warning. And so these are the contingencies that maybe won't become real, but everybody on this map. And even underneath the key here, I'm thinking of you, people in Seaview, my friends in Opihikau, even though you're kind of hidden under the key and we don't talk about you every night, anyone who's below the cracks on Highway 130 should be prepared for the possibility of that happening. And to put that in the context of the larger eruptions, everyone below the cracks on Highway 130 is dealing with the conditions as best they can, and for many people that's the best option, especially for now since the eruption is stable at fissure 8. But those cracks could widen in another earthquake. The ground is still moving, we know it's still moving, and we're depending on our escape routes through Chain of Craters Road, through the Alahili Road, and all of those are threatened as well. Because here's the big picture. The summit is still collapsing. The lava is still erupting. Neither of those two things seem like they're going to stop. And as the summit continues to collapse, which Philip will talk more about what's happening about the summit, it could end up damaging the roads that we intend to use out through the national park. There's a good chance that if it continues, the road, which is called Crater Rim Drive, which you need to use to get out Chain of Craters, could also be consumed by the collapsing. Highway 11 could eventually be cracked outside of the gate of the national park. And so those will affect those escape routes. And it's important for everybody living with the situation to understand that those things are possible before this eruption is over. We still see a likelihood of an ending rather than going for years and years and years and years. But before it finishes, that's the reality we're facing. And so whatever happens next, a breakout from the fissure 8 flow field or a new fissure becoming active, don't get too overwhelmed with the details of which road is it heading down, which blue line is it going for. When it happens, when that change occurs, everybody on this map needs to watch out. And that's the bottom line. So I guess that's where I listen.
Yeah, so there are several escape routes that exist, you know. I mean, that's why they're putting so many of them out. But as John is saying, any one of them could be compromised, and we don't know which one. We don't know, like, the order it might go in. We're not sure how that's going to work out in the end. So, you know, another way that I've thought about it is that, you know, now that we have kind of a little bit of stability, is the best time to be doing our organizing and preparing for what might happen next, whether it happens in the next week, or if it happens in the next month, or in the next year, or the next few years. You know, the reality is that living in Puna now means living with volcanic eruptions, right? Even if this eruption stops this week, and it keeps degassing for months and months and months, the eruption interval here in this area is only 13 years on average. That means it could happen as, you know, as soon as next year, or 2 years, or 3 years, and we won't know. We won't know until something actually happens. But the reality of living near the rift zone, whether we're on it in Leilani or just below it, you know, it's a new reality. Basically, is what I'm saying for people living in Puna. So now is the time to get organized, get prepared. You know, the people who have had bad experiences evacuating, you know, I wish they would have had their stuff organized and like priority, like the first load of things that absolutely have to go. And if I have a chance to get a second load, what would I take my second load? What would I take my third load? That kind of thing. It's kind of traumatic to think about that now, especially, you know, if you don't want something to happen to your place. But now is the best time to do it, right? And ideally, you do it and nothing happens. But, you know, let's say that there is a hurricane next year, or there's another eruption, or whatever it happens to be. You know, we have a lot of natural hazards living on this island, right? So, you know, I know most of us are not as good at that, of, you know, being prepared and organized for this kind of situation. And now is, you know, a good time to do that. Yeah.
One thing I'd like to add is expanding kind of about what John was saying. People need to be ready to evacuate, not just, you know, for anticipating the lava flow, getting ahead of it type of thing, but getting ahead of civil defense too, because they will restrict access down to these areas. You have your pet stuff all packed up, ready to go, and then you evacuate your family, try and go back and get your stuff, and they don't let you in, type of thing. So and animals are going to be scared. You know, if something happens and it starts going crazy, coming down rift, then you're going to have to account for animals that might run away, might disappear. You have to be ready for that kind of stuff. That's hard to be ready for, but, you know, we have a lot of people that have lost animals just because they got scared and ran away the night of or the day of, and it's really hard to anticipate. You got to be prepared, you know, extra preparation for, you know, everything along those lines.
That is an excellent point, and to add to that too, I mean, the moral of the story is bring your cat on the first trip if you can, and you just plan ahead to, if they don't let you back into your house, even after you've made the preparations. We've seen that over and over again. People thought they would have another chance, and they ended up not having another chance. Yeah, and yeah, it's just an excellent point. There's something else I was going to say about that. But that's excellent. Oh, that's what it was. And so anybody who's concerned, you know, there's a lot of neighborhoods that are far away from this. Nanavali, hopefully nobody in Nanavali needs to evacuate. But one thing is, if you have a buddy, somebody who can help you get organized, because a lot of people go into paralysis when you start think about actually packing up, getting your animals, getting your stuff. It's so hard. It's just too overwhelming, and you get paralyzed, don't know what to bring, don't know what to pack. So work together, friends and family, help each other decide what should be prioritized. And the animals planning ahead in case you lose access is an excellent point. Because it's not necessarily going to be the lava flow that cuts you off, it's the authorities that'll cut you off from your home. And that is really, really important for people to recognize. Yeah.
Change in speed a little bit. There's still been activity along the north flank around Kīlauea. There's been more houses lost. Our count is 5 homes lost at this point, but I suspect heavily that there's been more lost since I've been able to update. It still seems, from my vantage point, over here, looking in, it looks still to be advancing slowly along the northern flank. when USGS publishes their map later today, I suspect that we'll see more expansion along this area, more expansion into the beach lots where these homes have been taken, and even into farm lots. The whole flank is very volatile in that area. Multiple lava channels yesterday, and the overflights that we've seen are coming feeding the ocean. But the biggest plume was definitely from the northern side.
Yeah, so let's continue with our lower rift zone update. What about the fissures, you guys? What can you tell us about the fissures? You gonna take it, Dane?
What about the fissures?
Yeah, so fissure 8 still our
fissure
monster?
8's still the thing. It varies sporadically between its fountain heights, but when I was out there, it was about 180. You know, you couldn't see it over the cone, but there was definitely blasts and waves that would come out that were 220 feet tall. These things were just massive coming over. The amount of volume coming out of there, the lava river speed can't be understated. It's overwhelming when you're there. 8 itself, I mean, most of the overflows that have been happening, I mean, these overflows have happened almost every day, regularly. This morning's USGS flight reported minimal overflows along the channel. There was a Fissure 22 reactivated a few days ago more heavily than it's activated in the past. There was a brush fire that started just to the north of Fissure 22, east of PGV. That fire burned itself out yesterday morning and was still smoldering. We could see smoke from the hub looking out that way. But there was one home threatened. We don't think it went, but that whole area, we could see reactivation without warning. We could see it die again and go back to the way it was. Fissure 8 become the status quo, solo, fissure alone. Could go up rift. It's impossible to say at this point.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, we're not sure what's going to happen with 22. We have kind of thought back, and we know that 22 was the other fissure that was active the longest, before 8.
Longest running.
Right. It was 22 that put the big flow down towards Mackenzie. So the opening there is big enough for a lot of lava to come out. We know that for sure already. So we're going to keep our eye on that, and we don't know. We don't know if we have any data to predict if it's going to increase in activity or not. Yeah.
One thing to note about Fissure 22 is in the past month it has formed a really tall and skinny cone that kind of compromises the way in which the lava flow from 22 initially fell down to Mackenzie. This new flow seemed to be coming towards the northeast. It's unknown if that's going to continue, if it would fall back down to Mackenzie, or where exactly it's going to go if it did restart in that area.
All right. That's some good info, guys. Let's see. Yeah, sorry, guys. I'm not as proficient with Facebook Live as Ikaika, so sorry the map words got reversed there because I was using the wrong camera.
That's okay.
So, anyways. So that's the rift zone, what's going on with the rift zone, yeah. We have, maybe we can look at the new maps that came out in the last couple of days, and we can get those pulled up for you guys.
So you want me to try it?
Over here, yeah. You want to hold it?
Mm-hmm.
All right, so this is a new map from yesterday, 3 p.m., June 30th.
Mm-hmm. A little closer here.
Yeah, so there's an area with the darker red showing where the active flows were since the last map.
A little bit here. It's a long area on the coast. Most of the lava going in up here, like Dane was saying.
Yeah.
And a little bit of expansion here that's consumed, you said at least 5 homes?
At least 5.
At least 5 on the north there. So you notice that the south is getting no fresh lava. So it's all this northern areas where more of the lava has been spreading out under the crust, out of the channel, probably distributed through a lot of areas where it's squeezing underneath the bottom of all that crust out to the edges. So it's probably pretty complicated, but spreading out, we called it pancaking the other night, which I think is a good way to think about it. So the pancakes spreading out in all directions up at the northern end of things, which is nice because that means it's no longer advancing towards the south to the Warm Ponds Park and the school.
And one person asked me, or several people have asked me, how close is it to Secrets? How close is it to the Warm Ponds? It's about a half mile still. It's still about a half mile, and with the lack of activity that has happened along the south side, that hasn't expanded, as John was saying. So it's Warm Ponds still relatively good. The remaining 30 or so homes and beach lots heavily threatened at this time.
All right, so yeah, that's kind of the lower Perth eruption update. As far as we know, the actual walls of the channel are still all stable. The walls of the actual vent seem stable also. You know, we haven't seen any sign of anything like that. I haven't heard any reports of any seeps. Have you guys?
No.
No, so it was only just a one-time deal, you know, almost a week ago now.
And the seep should show up on our thermal scan that USGS puts out. So we've every time we look at the thermal scan, we're trying to get indication if a seep is showing up anywhere. And the only thing that resembles seeping is where you can see at the end of the flow, now where we had a nice open river, it's been kind of retreating back, and this is all crust is forming over it, but you can still see it's hot. So the lava is escaping the crust in all these different ways, and those are similar to what they're describing as a seep. But that's to be expected down here because it's so flat, and it's always kind of been spreading out down there.
Hey, look who we got here. We got Ikaika.
The ocean entries are extra volatile.
Right.
Hey, man.
Hey.
How's it going, guys?
Good, good, good. How are you?
Good. Fissure 22 is pumping.
Yeah.
Lava is like, they said, is about 250 yards. I think one of the pilots and the crew that was on the helicopter said that the fissure had dispersed some lava that went about 200 yards.
200 yards, huh?
Wow.
Yeah.
So, yeah, so it could be that Fissure 22 is becoming even more active than before, right? That seems to be what we're hearing, yeah?
That seems to be the trend. That seems to be the
And
trend.
then 24 gets some crazy stuff happening too. So not too sure. I gotta confirm with that.
Okay, 24, yeah.
24 getting gassy, activating, maybe.
A massive amount of a lot of gassy going on at 24 or even 9. I'm not too sure which one it is, but a lot of gassy down on the south end. When I was in Kīlauea today doing animal rescue stuff, you could see 2 plumes coming out of that area.
Okay.
So
it could be 9 or 24. So gas is activating out of one of these potentially.
Yeah, so here we get the live, the most recent webcam image.
Yeah.
Was it showing gas actually more on the east end of the fissure, yeah?
Yeah.
It's because 9 and 24 would actually be behind there.
And the lack of winds just putting the plume straight up in the air.
Right. Well, one thing I noticed, Ikaika, even when we were out on a boat yesterday, was that, you know, there's basically almost two plumes, yeah, that are coming off in the area. There's a one from 8 that seems to be the massive one, but there's that one to the side, yeah? Is that what you're talking about, that 9 and 22 area?
This morning was pretty big. So with the helicopter guys that was doing the animal rescue, was doing it with the nets. They did a flyover, and they said 24 could be just a lot of gases, but 22 was yesterday was spattering pretty hard, and it was starting to create a that went about 200, 300 yards from this 22. And this morning it was still spattering, but the flows have kind of slowed down a little bit. But it could be because it's widening near the base of the 22. So that's the last thing that I know of.
All right. So you got any update from the ocean entry from this morning?
Ocean entry, the south end has slowed down quite substantially, but the north end has picked up, and the middle side is still about 1.4 miles wide, 1.3, 1.4 miles wide, and it's still pumping so much lava. Now you can actually see the huge rivers that is going into there's like 3 or 4 different big rivers that is entering the ocean. But
Wow.
the north end is moving pretty fast into the ocean, and it's actually on the north end. It started to take out a couple of houses last night and this morning. One house this morning.
Did you hear that?
Yeah, one house this morning.
Okay. Wow.
Yeah.
So
multiple houses that it was really.
It's real active.
That north end, yeah, really active. Yeah.
It was very close to multiple houses in the Kapoho Beach lots, farm lots, all in this area that still remains. Laulani Circle lost a few homes.
Right.
So it's sad. I mean, there was about 30 homes left before all this started. And now we're just watching the final few fall.
Right.
Another thing too, from the helicopter pilot, and we've been seeing this in periods. Like we've been seeing these fluctuations. Early this morning, they said the lava was coming out of Fissure 8, was pumping hard, like a lot of volume. And then when they went up again at around like 9, 10 o'clock, he said the volume has dropped a little bit. But they've been seeing that kind of fluctuations like every day, and it's getting more frequent with these fluctuations of the flows are picking up in certain time of the day and dying out some certain time of the day. So we know there's a lot of pulsing going on.
Important detail, huh?
Yeah, that's interesting. Yeah, because I mean, it's probably too early to say that also shows an indication that the lava is going to a different place, like Fissure 22, for example. I mean, it could be just, the natural pulsing of the system. I think about when I turn on my garden hose, that there's a natural pulse of the water that comes through there also, just because of the length of the hose and the pump at the far end of it.
And we've seen it fluctuate between about 150 foot volume. We don't know about the volume coming out, but we've seen the fountains fluctuate between about 150 and 200 feet tall, over the past few weeks. So might be right. It might be pushing something down that area.
Yeah, we definitely want to be on higher alert now for that fissure reactivating as a potential. We hope it doesn't. We've been wanting lava to stay in its channel and keep going to the ocean to relieve as much pressure as possible that way without destroying anything else. But we obviously don't have any control over that. Yeah.
But they have seen. I'm gonna get up a flight tomorrow to kind of figure that out. But you remember, Phil, the other day when we went out to the river, the levees or the channel walls was noticeable that it was the lake was little lower than the river was little lower than the last time you went.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
And in the helicopter they've been seeing that, so they've been seeing part of the walls being shown, and then later on, like a couple hours later, those walls are disappear, and it's at a high level again.
Wow.
They're seeing these fluctuations pretty frequent. So.
Yeah.
So it seems pretty obvious. Seems a change in volume, huh?
Yeah, that volume is actually
pulsing effect.
Yeah, pulsing effect, and that's what we used to see in Kīlauea. Those pulses. Some days some days they have more lava, some days they have less. So.
Right.
I think it's a steady trend and steady. It's happening steadily.
Yeah, that's important info for anyone who's anywhere near the edge of those rivers, right? Even if it might look perfectly safe 1 minute, like we know it's going to change, and the changes are happening on an every few hour basis. It sounds like, right? When these pulses come through, so that's something to be aware of.
Very dangerous.
Even the other day too, I don't know if you remember. The first day that we went to that rivers, you remember it was kind of low when we got there. Well, it was still full, but it wasn't really active as much as like a couple hours, like an hour later when we were there. I don't know if you remember when we were watching that rapid build up lava. In like 10 minutes, and it started to flow so much lava, and I think the steady trend of what's happening now.
Yeah, so we'll have to keep an eye on that. Yeah, those fluctuations. So Ikaika, what we got to? Do you have any more info about what's happening in Leilani with the new regulations? People are asking about that.
Well, I haven't. I got the person one of the persons that got regulated is Ken Boyer. So we want to get him aboard and talk to him about what happened with him.
Okay.
You got
in Leilani, but he was put on a ban list. So
Okay.
Unfortunately, he got off the ban list, but he was put on a ban list where he wasn't able to enter Leilani again. So I found some other info about what happened was, a deeper story of what was happening with a couple of the officials I talked to today about why they're regulating. And I'll reveal that later on. I just want to make sure that's the real actual data, and they'll let everybody know what's going on.
All right.
So I'll be on the boat this afternoon, giving some updates, but I'll let you guys know what's going to happen. Okay.
Yeah. All right. Yeah. Thanks for checking in with us. Thanks, Kikes.
All right. Stay classy.
Yeah. Stay classy. All right.
Aloha.
Aloha. Okay, so I'm not sure how you're gonna disappear from there, but there he goes.
There you go.
All right. So
good to have him. You wanted to Holy Mau?
Yeah. We should finish talking about. We were talking about the thermal map.
Yeah.
A little bit.
Yeah. Well, welcome back, everybody. Detour with the very important information from Captain Ikaika. What we're talking about is the thermal map is always giving us our most accurate, detailed image because it's an actual image of the flow, and you can see the hottest lava is coming out in some fairly large streams by the north, and that's coming from the channel somehow, which is crusting over more and more backwards here. But you can see these hot white lines under the cracks there. There's lava fanning out beneath this crust somehow and feeding those little rivers that appear by the coast at the north end. And so that's essentially the same kind of function that a seep would do, but we're not seeing any of those hot areas leaking out of the edges of the main channel. You see, we've got a really full river, white hot on the thermal scan, but no little leaking and very few overpourings, at least when this image was taken. So anybody trying to keep track of that, the thermal image is a good place to see things changing on the flow field because it'll always show you where the hottest stuff is happening.
Yeah, and do you want to talk about the little accretionary edge that we
could, yeah.
Out, yeah?
This is it scared me more than it scared Philip, but you can see in this image, which was taken yesterday, there's this fairly large block is moving in the river, and watching the previous images, it used to be attached right here. A sort of shelf was cooling on the edge of the channel, and it was probably forming over several days, and then between two thermal images it broke off and was starting to slide down the river. But you can see it's more gray. It's not black like these other islands, so it's either got layers of pretty hot lava on it, or it might be relatively thin. It could be more like a raft, more than one of the boulders that we see floating down the middle, dragging on the bottom. It could actually be held up by the lava. But that's a really good example of how pieces from the walls of the channel break off and get carried down. And this is also, if that were a big stable block that wasn't just going to shatter as the river drags it along, you see that's large enough, you can imagine it obstructing smaller parts of the channel lower down. Like in the rapids where it gets narrow, a block like that could potentially block it, and then we can all imagine that would cause an overflow, you know. But that kind of stuff is happening in the channel all the time, and this particular block, we haven't heard of an overflow, so it must not have blocked the channel. It might have been mostly a slab of crust more than a full boulder. But that's the kind of thing that we're watching, because obviously can change the course of the flow, and this is all pretty new science too. So to get more details like that, the thermal image is a gold mine of information for our consideration of the channel. Yeah. So.
Yeah. So let's see. I might be able to. Here, let me turn this around. I might be able to get the time lapse of that going, and we can maybe zoom into that area. So this is the time lapse we got going on of how the fissures develop. Let's zoom into that spot, which fissure 8's still coming.
Yeah, haven't got to fissure 8 yet. There's our 22.
22.
There's Big Daddy.
Big fissure 8.
There's 8. Okay, so the region we're looking at.
Right in here is the oh look, see, so initially it had a big part that already broke off. Went from 2 islands lower down to 1 island.
So now it's forming right there.
Right there, you can see it forming and then broke away. So in those last two images, it kind of formed and broke away. You can see right there is forming a shelf, no shelf, forming, broke. So because it only took it a few days to form, that might mean it's not as big of a block. But those are the kinds of things you can see in the thermal image when you look close.
All right, yeah, so that's still a concern of ours, that, there could be some blockage of that channel at some point. We haven't seen it happen, but we think the hazard still exists for that, yeah. We have seen most of the videos that we've seen of any of these lava blocks moving down a river. They are kind of brittle and break apart a lot of times.
Fall apart in the rapids.
But some of these blocks are so huge that the pieces they break into are also huge, and it could kind of stack, right? There's a famous area by the Mana'ulu fissure where we see a whole bunch of these lava boulders kind of stacked in almost like a beaver dam style, right? So they can actually start pinning against each other if there's enough of them in the river at one time, and that could cause a kind of block anyways. So I think that probably something like that happens, it's going to jump the bank. It'll probably happen not for very long because the pressure of that river pushing on that stuff is going to clear it out at some point. But it doesn't mean that for anyone who's nearby, or the flow that comes out even for a short time could be massive. Right, so that's kind of the hazard that the potential exists. We don't see, just to reiterate, we don't see any sign of that happening right now. The amount of these boulders, lava boats, rafts we see going down the channel is concerning, because if anyone is near, you see how many of these videos are coming out. They're just happening all the time, right? There's one going down almost every minute, right? So
the fissure 8 flow, the river of lava, is extraordinarily dangerous, and so that's important for everyone to treat the entire length of the flow. The river we have can change at any time, and a new flow, especially while it's unstable, while it's first forming, we need to treat the entire length of the flow as if it can break out from that area. And it's still a good rule of thumb to think of the fissure 8 river in that way, that it can break at any time, almost anywhere along it. We're trying to analyze the places where that might actually happen, or the reasons for it to happen. But everybody should just regard it as a very, very dangerous, powerful thing. I don't know how to state that enough.
Yeah, it's something we're hoping is not going to happen, but but we're talking about it now because NASA's having to talk about it before it's too late. Right. So that's where we are with the Ripstone eruption. Yeah. So
if you want to go to the summit with your images, I can hold them.
Sure. Well, let's see. Let's turn the camera around again. All right. So sorry, guys. If it's possible that my speaker is, I don't know, got some lint in it or something. I'm not sure why you guys can't hear that well all the time. So we'll try to keep
we ran into
talking as loud as we can.
It has to do with updating the Facebook app, I think. Ikaika found out. So it's a compatibility thing. Sometimes the sound. But we promised a comprehensive update. So we have one more chapter, the summit. We're still gonna do. So bear with us here.
Yeah, so I'm not sure that's what maybe updating Facebook will help you guys. Maybe maybe not, but you might want to try that. I'm not sure if that'll help, and I don't know what else I can do. We'll just hope our connection's good enough, and we'll just keep going with it. Yeah.
Stay strong, Puna.
Yeah.
We'll get through this together.
All right. So let me refresh this. But this is our earthquake map. That's current as of, let's see, the last earthquake on here is showing as 2:56, so that was about 10 minutes ago, right? So I see most of them at the summit. There's one up by Kamana near Hilo, but there's kind of not a whole lot going on up here. People are actually feeling earthquakes around here. We know the ground is still moving for sure. There was some info that came out at the meeting in Volcano a couple of days ago that was interesting to me, right? So people have been asking, you know, it's also an FAQ. So if you go to the HVO website, you can also look at the just posted FAQ about earthquakes in Hawaii, associated with this eruption, right? And so a couple things they address. One is why some earthquakes appear and disappear sometimes. And that's because the computers are handling those events that are usually kind of small. And sometimes because there's so many earthquakes happening one on top of the other kind of thing, there's a lot of noise in the data, so to speak. The computer will sometimes pick two different locations for the same earthquake. And those are not both true, right? So in that case, you want to go and remove the data that's not true. And the challenge is when you look at the map and you see the thing removed and you think, oh, is it true or not true? That's, you know, it's kind of a balance between, do you want to get the information out as quickly as possible, have a computer do it for you automatically, if that happens, you can get the information out within 3 minutes usually, right? In comparison, for these big collapse events that are happening at the summit, we'll talk about that a little bit more, but those events that are coming in at a magnitude 5.5, 5.2, 5.3, up to 5.5, 5.6 kind of thing, those ones are now waiting for that earthquake energy to get all the way to Alaska and California.
Wow.
Before they actually use that information to calculate a proper magnitude for the events that are happening here.
And to get to Alaska and California takes about a half hour.
And it takes about a half an hour to get there, that's right. So their target is to have that event posted within about an hour of it happening.
Okay.
Whereas the other ones, you know, it's usually within 5 minutes by computer, and then a human will have to come and check if there's an extra event or something flaky happening, and then they'll take off those events probably within an hour, I'd imagine also. But you gotta imagine, if we're having 600, 700 earthquakes a day, these guys got their plate full, right? And they might miss one, or it might take 2 hours or 3 hours, or it might take half a day or something along those lines, you know, for it to actually kind of stabilize to the data that the USGS believes is actually real data. Right? So basically the computer can introduce fake data, and we can't take that and run with it like it's real data that's then being hidden.
Fake data?
Right.
Oh, no. Oh.
So that's the kind of the FAQ for the earthquakes. Let's see, so...
Oh, also a lot of people are saying the earthquakes feel more intense. I felt the 5.3. I was up there yesterday, and it really had us moving. And the geologists mentioned that in their town meeting as well, that maybe the way that the seismic wave is moving through the ground has changed as it continues collapsing, so they feel more intense, but the magnitude is still the same. So it's kind of a wild ride up there for a lot of people, how often they're feeling these quakes. But the magnitude of the main events is right about the same as it has been.
Yeah, so let's see, what you got going on here, Dane?
Collapse explosions at Holly Mountain.
Collapse explosions, okay.
In the past week.
All right, so
yeah, these are the collapse explosions that have happened in the past week. You can see all of them are 5.2, 5.3. Let's see about depth. So we're at 1.1 kilometers.
Minus 1.1.
Minus 1.1.
That's the surface.
That's the surface.
So 0.5, 0.2, 0.6, 0.8, 0.9. So they've all still been, you know, really shallow earthquakes, these collapse explosions. They haven't really changed that much. And if you look here, this is the tilt, ground tilt up at Kīlauea summit. These have been the predictors for these collapse explosions. You can see we're about midway into this cycle right now. Soon we'll start seeing the 3.0s, the 4.0s in that range, and those will start building. You can see that those spikes in there. And this jump is the collapse explosion that takes place. So it's still happening up there. We still see the deformation continue and the subsidence continue from the sensor, the GPS sensors inside the Caldera. So,
excuse me.
It's amazing how consistent these collapse explosions are.
Yeah.
You can see from here, it's just...
Yeah, I think I've heard the average is 28 hours.
Yeah.
There's been as maybe this one over here might have been a 15-hour one. I think was in the last few days, but mostly they've been pretty consistent. And then there's something happening with the instrument up here. You know, either the instrument's not. There's some break between the instrument's data and the website, right? So it could be the website, it could be the way that the instrument gets radioed back to the command center, which used to be the HVO building and possibly still is, but it's being moved to the UH Hilo, right? So there's a lot of work done behind the scenes to get this stuff online, and something about it isn't working right now. Oh, excuse me. One thing I wanted to mention here, let's go back to go back to this over here again.
There you go.
Just 1 second, I'm gonna get a sip of water. All right, excuse me.
Hang in there, Phil. We need you.
Almost done.
Now I know how Ikaika feels.
I know, right? Take care of yourself.
So, yeah, so the magnitudes don't correspond. What's going on with my throat?
It happens.
Talk about the intensity as opposed to the magnitude, yeah?
Oh, talk about the intensity versus the magnitude? Yeah, so the magnitude is relatively small, but when these earthquakes are near the surface, or if they're associated with some of these outer faults of the caldera, they're very close to some of the people that are actually feeling them. So it's kind of the location and the kind of ground motion that's beginning to happen along some of these faults that are further from Halemaumau, which is probably making the felt intensity a lot different than it was earlier in this process for people up there.
Right. So there's basically two different scales, right? There's a scale of magnitude, which is how much energy is released from an earthquake at a single time. And the intensity is how much the ground shakes in a particular location. Right, so they're actually showing both here. You know, they're showing an intensity of, of 3, which means that a lot of people have actually felt it and reported it to the websites. Right, and then 2, maybe a little less, and right. So, but basically, besides where you are compared to the earthquake, the kind of ground you're on also matters. If you're on kind of loose soil, sandy ground, for example, you're actually liable to shake more. If you're in a house that's up on stilts, you're liable to shake more. Right, so there's other factors that influence who can feel this and when they feel it, apart from just the location and the depth of the earthquakes that are happening, right? So for those who are not around, people who live in Volcano Village and in the golf course, right? The golf course is, I'll point it out on a map in there, it's here, right over there. That's the golf course area, and Volcano Village is kind of right over there, right? People in those areas are feeling earthquakes all the time, So they're naturally getting stressed out and nervous because it's nonstop, right? They knew to kind of, they wait for that buildup, they wait for the release for that 5.5 earthquake that happens, and it's reset. And then every day they're dealing with that, every single day for a while now. Okay, so what else you got, Dane?
Just horizontal deformation readings.
Right. Okay.
This is basically the spread. Is this east to west or north to south?
It's kind of north to south, I think.
North to south, right? So this is yeah, it shows the movement from the Highway 11 down towards the coastline in here. But you can see there was a little bit of almost a stagnation in the readings that were, the rate slowed and almost stopped, but it looks like the latest readings we're getting out of there show a acceleration again. It just shows it back to deflating, back to moving.
Philip and I were debating about that as it appeared. And it could have to do with the geometry of the crater as much as it has to do with it. The other indications is that the summit is still continuing to deflate at a similar rate, and even if it hesitates a little bit, like that change in the curve might suggest, Philip and I were discussing, kind of thinking that might have to do with we've reached kind of the outer faults that one of the geologists has described as the boundary fault for this event in the caldera. And so some of those small changes in angle, they could be important, but like Dane said, it seemed like it was slowing down the rate of deflation, and now it's accelerating steep slope on that curve again.
Right.
So there could be a couple of factors involved in the situation.
Let's look at that. Look at that plot just a little bit more. Where'd it go? So down over here. Right up here,
yeah. So that's the change in angle we're saying. So it's deflating is what this indicates. Right. And then it slowed down a little bit, but now you can see the new data in the past little bit seems to be deflating on down further.
Right. So I mean, there are times when the data is very coherent. It's almost like a straight line right here. But there's times where it's a little noisier, like right in there, right? So you have to watch out for that kind of spread. You might be, initially have thought this was a slowing down also, but it actually wasn't in the end because it was just noise, right? And then speaking of slowdowns, right here you see the actual rate of drop, is still high, but it went from higher to a little bit less to higher again, and so it could have gone to a little bit less, and we don't know what the pattern is until we see more data.
Yeah.
basically on that, yeah.
And in the bigger picture, fluctuations in any pattern like that are natural. Nature comes in cycles and surges, and so a little bit of fluctuation might be just perfectly normal for the process.
Let's look at let's see. There's an image. Sorry.
Vertical component.
Okay, yeah, I'm gonna do a vertical component. Okay, let's go to. I want to show people the. Sorry guys, I lost the plot. Here we go. The vertical component there. That one, yeah. Either one of those, yeah. So these are the new station that they've put in because of the loss of the old one there, and it's showing. Let's look at the scale here on the side. It's in millimeters.
Millimeters.
Right, so that says 1,000 actually, and 500. Hello, here's our friend Kavi.
You guys have a good night. Have a good flight.
Yeah, thanks Kavi. Huh? So
who understands these maps?
Well,
anybody?
I don't know. Maybe some people do.
Yeah. John.
We're not looking at maps right now, but I can still help.
Sure.
So 1,000 millimeters is a meter, right? That's what this is showing right there, right? So we're talking on a scale like this goes back to the 25th. This is a week plot. So believe it or not, we've gone from maybe 1.75 above to at the far end. We're all the way down at this lowest line over here, 1.5 below. So that's 3.25. Is that right? My math right? 1.75 plus 1.5, right? So 3.25 meters.
Meters. Wow.
Of drop in the last week, right? And that's not far off of what we hear you guys just saying. Some stations are showing as much as a meter a day some days. During these,
For those of us watching at home, 3.5 meters is more than 10 feet. The ground actually sank more than 10 feet in less than a week.
In the last week at this particular location.
At that particular location.
And
so
the
it's amazing.
station that we lost that fell into Hawai Mau before it disappeared and fell 90 meters down into the bottom of the crater, it was showing 10-meter drops every single collapse explosion. 10 meters, just step down.
Right, which is amazing. It's amazing, when geologists study things moving at millimeters per year.
Yeah.
Right, and then this thing is moving 10 meters per day, right? So that's really, really impressive. But I wanted to show you guys something to help you visualize what's going on over there, right? So let's go to the image page of the HVO, and there's a new satellite animation of the collapse structure, right? So let me get the video. So it shows the dates in the top left there. June 30th is the most recent image there. Yeah, I'm gonna zoom it back out a little bit here. So it goes back from the beginning of May. Yeah. So you guys can see the slumping, right?
The faulting, right?
That's the outermost crack. Yeah, that's the boundary fault, as it's being called, right? It goes through there. It meets the old Caldera wall, all the way down, and goes all the way around. Yeah. The center of the dropping is right in the middle, right at the east side of the old Hawai Mau pit, which is right above where we believe the shallow magma chamber to be, right? So another piece of information that came out from the meeting in Volcano a few days ago was that by some estimates, to the first order, the amount of magma that's come out compared to what they think is the size of the reservoir. There's a lot of ifs in there, but we're trying to get some quantification that maybe 30% of the upper chamber is actually emptied, right?
Wow.
So you might think that
that's a big percentage.
Yeah, it is a big percentage, but that also means there's a lot left in there, right? So the whole idea that the whole magma chamber it's not going to empty with eruption, right? There's always going to be some fraction of it, and there's going to be always a lot left. Once the pressure is released, once the gas that's able to come out is, yeah. So that's the pattern that we're looking at there. Yeah. So one thing to kind of point out also is everyone wants to know where the Jaggery Museum is and Volcanic Observatory. The old building is up there on a rim, right? And so there's actually reports of subsidence, all the way out through this area, all the way through here. And we've got cracks opening up. There's one on the Kīlauea Overlook Road that's right there.
Which is right here.
Yeah, there was one behind the visitor center was reported, which is way over there, right? So,
and then of course there's cracks in the golf course road, which is off the black area here. And I've heard they've seen cracking near Kīlauea Iki and Thurston Lava Tube. And so as this activity continues, just again try to reiterate the point that it could affect the roads outside and within the park if it continues. Some of those roads would impact the exit through Chain of Craters Road for people in Lower Puna.
Within the past week, we've seen the county went and paved Highway 11 again from the damage that had taken place, and we see these subsidence cracks from the surrounding area. It's very concentrated in Haleʻimaumau, but out in Volcano Golf Course, on the roads in there, Highway 11, those subsidence cracks are still showing up and getting more pronounced. They're small at this time, but
Right.
they're there.
Right. So yeah, the thing that maybe is worth emphasizing is that even if we don't expect those outermost cracks, those faults to move very much, it doesn't take much for them to actually disrupt the infrastructure, the roadway, pipes that people have in the ground, that kind of thing, right? So even though geologically what's happening in the golf course is, to me, fairly minor, those cracks have been there for a while. We'll talk about that shortly. But it doesn't mean that can't be really impactful as far as the people who are trying to navigate and still live in the area around here, right? I wanted to show you guys an image that's put together by Jay Robinson, I believe, put this together.
Mr. Jay Robinson.
And so this is actually this is a book that they sell in the park when this trail is open, the Haleʻimaumau Trail Guide, right, from the national park. And, we'll go through all the details of it, but there's a couple of things, right, we're talking about. Here is our schematic of what the Caldera actually looks like, going back to the 1400s, the last time there was a probably much huger collapse than the one we're seeing today, right? So this is the extreme of what can happen, but you see that there's basically one point down that drops the lowest right at the middle. And then we have these basic rings that go around, and you have these different steps of land that kind of go in. But at depth, they kind of all come and point together, and they basically all splay off of the same collapse feature, right? So it's not like these are different events. These are actually all part of the same structure and part of the same event.
Right.
So when we have magma withdrawing from the center down here, if it's just a little bit, then you only expect these first ones to activate and move down. And then once it goes down a little bit more, then these next ones activate and go down. And then once it goes down a little bit more, then these ones, and then these ones. And so now we've come to the point where the entire Caldera fault system is actually involved with this process, right?
Right.
So that's why I say it's not geologically surprising to see those cracks farther out in the golf course. And part of what we can do is talk about where the edge of these outermost cracks actually are. But before we do that, let me jump to the next two iterations of this graphic, right? So showing, let's just jump to how it was today, since this is what people are familiar with, right? So we actually had the lava lake within Haleʻimaumau as it existed up to, what has it been now, 2 months ago?
Yeah.
Wow. Coming up into that lowest inner pit, the bullseye of it, right? So you actually see that all these other cracks lower down existed, but they've been covered by this glaze of lava that's filled in a caldera over the last few hundred years, right? So the structure underground, it hadn't changed at all. We just kind of had a different view of it from the top, seeing all this stuff being covered up. So when we see these new cracks opening up, it's quite surprising to see them visually. It's very striking and dramatic. But these cracks have been there from the last time this happened, right? I imagine the whole caldera is kind of like a piston. The whole thing kind of rises and falls and rises and falls as magma is injecting underneath it.
Yep.
And the whole thing kind of rises, it can kind of bulge upwards with this kind of shaped crack, or it can kind of slump downwards in a similar kind of thing like that, right? And so kind of going back to what it looked like in 1823, which was after the last big explosion in 1790, right? We had a much larger lava lake filling most of the inner caldera floor, right? So the point of going through all this is just so you guys can see that the thing is very dynamic. It changes a lot. It's changed a lot since people have been here watching it, which hasn't been that long in the grand scheme of things. A couple hundred years of people actually being here watching this stuff. Right?
Western science.
Yeah, Western science, yeah. And it's important to mention the Hawaiians were scientists as well, and they observed everything, and that's recorded in their chants, right? Yeah. It's just not as easy to go and reference.
And then when we start talking about precision measurements and the modern technology and that kind of instrumentation, that's even less. I mean, we have plenty of monitors of Kīlauea, but outside of that, precise deformation data didn't even exist in 1955. That was 1956 it was installed.
Yeah, so we used to use 3 buckets with hoses in between them and a triangle on the ground. And we'd measure the different levels of water in each bucket, right? It might be a quarter, half mile apart, the size of this triangle kind of thing, right? And that's how you'd measure which way the ground was tilting, by putting these basically bucket systems out on a caldera floor.
But it worked.
It did work. Yeah, but it took some trial and error, right?
Yep.
For example, it only worked at night.
Oh.
Right? Because in
Right.
the daytime, when the sun is shining in a hose, they will actually create a flow from one, and you
Right.
couldn't trust it.
Eats up the water. Wow.
Right? So
That's
there,
funny.
you know, every technique has its limitations, and right, you kind of learn them as you go along, and sometimes it takes an event to come in and teach you, oh, hey, we can't measure this during the day anymore, or oh,
Right.
there's something else going on messing with our station one way or the other. Right? So that's kind of
Science doesn't happen all at once. Science happens over generations, you know. And this is everything we're seeing now is not well observed. I mean, you don't get a lot of chances to witness an eruption doing the things that we're seeing now, and nobody expected this degree of change at Halemaumau. It's not like it's unexpected geologically. We just didn't expect that we would be seeing it associated with this kind of eruption in Lower Puna right now, you know. So it's
So I think we're all impressed and struck by the scale of the collapse at Halemaumau, you know. But you know, I'm not extra worried about that part of it as far as the cracks at the golf course, right? There's more to talk about, a lot more to talk about as far as that goes, and so we'll keep going. But kind of building on what we just talked about as far as like this image of the structure of this thing underground and outermost cracks. We typically talk, when we look at this map, the first most obvious thing is this big dark line that defines the wall of the caldera today, right? I like to call that the main caldera wall, right? And there's another definition for caldera that I call the great caldera. That's the outermost cracks that are showing some significant movement, right? So if we look at the map now, actually, let's start over here. Right, here's a cliff, that's the edge of the outer caldera wall. It goes through there, it goes off our map, it actually goes kind of through the golf course, right? We can't see it on this image over here, but let's see what we can see down over here.
way outside there.
Yeah, it's not quite clear. I mean, it might come kind of through here, but it basically is going down across here.
Right here.
Yeah, and it kind of comes across, and
Back to chain
there
of
it
craters.
is, going across a chain of craters. And you can't quite see off here, but it goes behind, this is the Luamanu crater, and actually Kīlauea Iki is wholly inside the Great Caldera, right? So Kīlauea Iki is actually part of this caldera also. It looks separate because there's a nice little septum in between here, right? But this is really the same. That crack goes all the way, the main caldera crack, and then the outer caldera crack goes actually out behind it. So when we see these cracks happening at the, behind Kīlauea Iki, or behind the visitor center, or in a golf course, these are areas that were already known as being part of this fault system, right? That kind of relates to this image that I showed you guys, right? These are the cracks that are kind of on the outermost outside, right? The way they draw this image is actually pretty good. You can see that there's a little bit of movement up here, a little bit more, and a huge amount right there, right? And then less. Each of these actual steps can move different amounts.
Right.
And that's why we have what we call the Great Caldera on the outside, and then the main caldera where the most movement has actually happened in the past. Right? But all these faults can be moving, right? So we kind of go back to our talk about the GPS. When we look at this image now and how far this thing is spread, the boundary fault is actually on this whole northwest side. It's actually reached the main caldera, the caldera wall right there. Right now, notice there's actually this whole sliver of ground in here. Another one of these steps. There's another fault that goes back over here. Right, that's not moving a huge amount like this one is. Right, so to answer people who think or are wondering about whether HVO is going to fall into the crater, I don't believe so, or I won't believe so until I see this piece of ground moving first, right? And if you look at how these things are kind of stacked on each other underground, right? It's not so easy to just kind of drop the one above down into that spot. It's kind of the one below it is wedged in there, right? So it's not so easy to do that. So I don't believe it's going to actually fall in. It's definitely sagging. I've heard, I think the data we saw is it's dropped down by maybe 3/4 of a foot so far, right? So that's significant.
One thing to note about HVO is they're not going to fall into the crack, as Phil was saying, highly unlikely, but the foundation of HVO has been ruined by this drop. There's cracks all throughout it. If this thing were to stop today, it would take a very long time to get HVO to be able to receive visitors again as it was before, prior to this event.
Jagger Museum,
Sorry.
Absolutely.
And it's worth noting the Great Caldera faults that Phil was pointing out to you here. They extend over Chain of Craters Road out to Highway 11, and so the same token, we can have pretty bad damage to the roads without pieces falling all the way in. So those just got to keep abreast of all this information because it could become relevant if this process continues even further.
Yeah. In fact, we should expect those cracks to occur, right? We should, we'd be silly not to expect those cracks to occur where that cross-sectional crater is right around Uluwamanu, right? So if we don't hear about cracks at Uluwamanu, I'll be surprised.
Yep.
Right. So that's likely to happen. One of the things that was mentioned in the meeting is that the maintenance crew is not going out and doing checks all the time because it's dangerous to be out there, right? And why go and check the thing if it's going to crack again more the next day and more the next day and more the next day? So when it comes time to, I think they're putting extra priority on that escape route road and make sure that's passable almost all the time. But a lot of these other areas are not priorities, like going to the museum is not a priority, right? Those cracks, when everything is done, settling, that's when they're going to address the issue of, can we fix the road? Do we want the overlook to be where it was before, which is not a given anymore? What do we do with the infrastructure that's there already, right? These are all big questions. And so, they've said it's going to take them many weeks to even assess the damage in the first place. Many weeks, right? So after they assess the damage, they have to worry about prioritizing the damage. And then starting to repair it, right? Yep. So you're looking.
It's not over, so that's all way ahead of ourselves. Yep.
Yeah,
it's not over. Yep. That'll happen when it's over.
Yeah.
They'll do all that.
Yeah, and for them, one definition I've heard of it being over is, no more of these big earthquakes for at least 2 weeks, maybe a month, something like that.
And Civil Defense has even said that their consideration for it being over to go in and do things like road repair and establishing utilities and that kind of stuff is 6 months. Of inactivity. 6 months.
Right.
That's
so
for
the county, yeah.
For the county.
That's really interesting, yeah.
We should probably.
So the thing about the park is, basically you guys can expect it's not going to be open for many months. That's the bottom line. Even if it were to end today, it would take months to get that thing back open, and they're going to have to do a lot of checks and bring in engineers and all that kind of thing. So it's not what everyone wants to hear, especially with tourism so far down. But that's the reality. It's the national park, that area of it, because Kahuku is still open, right? There are still rangers at Mopapa down in Hilo. There's rangers at the airport. There's rangers at the Volcano Arts Center and the Volcano Village. So they're around and wanting to talk to people, right? But the actual park summit of Kīlauea, that area that was the most popular people to visit, is basically off the boards indefinitely at this point, until we see something changing as far as that goes, right? So that's the basics of what's going on at the summit. There's another very important piece of info that came out to me, which was what Don Swanson was talking about as far as explosions at the summit of Kīlauea and what we can expect with that. Did you guys see that part of the video? The update from the meeting a few nights ago? No? Okay, I'll take it. Yeah.
Take that.
All right, so the question came up about gases being released from the summit of the volcano, and if they're driving these ash plumes into the sky, right? So we've had some ash plumes. The tallest one is quite tall, right? But their take on it now is that almost all those eruptions were driven by gas from the magma itself.
Right.
So all magmatic gas, and not the steam that we've been talking about for weeks and weeks and weeks, right? And the most important thing, I'll jump right to it, is that he said that some of the new models that they put out as far as how these hydrothermal systems work, is it could take up as, maybe 2 months, maybe longer, for the water to actually be able to reach the point where the rock is hot enough to then vaporize, cause steam explosions. So we don't know, but it could be that those steam explosion phase is still coming. Still coming. We don't know that for sure. We don't want to try to, scare everybody with that.
Yeah, we should talk about this more again.
Because
that's a whole other territory, definitely.
Yeah, so we're extra alert for anything happening and a change in the pattern of the summit, right? If we start seeing steam come out of there, right, that's going to be a sign that something has changed with the hydrothermal system as far as where the water is reaching, right? So that's something we want to be very aware of as well. So
I think to boil that down, no pun intended, boil it down, is that, all indications from the experts, if we haven't, there could be other stages to this activity that haven't expressed themselves yet. And so it's time in this eruption for everyone to consider the longer term of these events. There's no indication that the processes that we're seeing at the summit and here in Lower Puna are getting ready to stop. And there is evidence that there might be more in store for us, especially at the summit. kind of framework that anyone living here needs to start thinking of. What are their options for the long term? Where to stay is that's going to be safe. How to prepare yourself, how to prepare your pets, and all those things that we keep trying to mention. Because we're in the middle of this, I think. So yeah, that's my below now.
All right. Our goal is to have a fairly comprehensive update. And I think we've
there's more to talk about.
Done a lot of that. We're probably dragging on, so I'm not sure if you guys have something else in particular that you want to.
One moment at a time.
All right. So,
Just take care of yourselves, you know? Look ahead, take care of yourselves, plan accordingly.
yeah, for sure, you
All I
guys.
got.
So thanks for joining us. Yeah, we'll do another update with Ikaika. It's not going to be until tomorrow because he's got 2 more boat tours tonight. Just so you guys know. If something major changes, then we'll break in and do something ourselves, right? But until then, we'll wait for our crew to get back together. And until then, guys,
Stay classy.
Stay classy.
Puna.
All right.
All right. Mahalo.